Ladies and gentlemen, as the dust settles on Joe Biden's disastrous presidency, we find ourselves staring at a scene so grotesque, so brazenly corrupt, it could be the plot of a political thriller. Except this isn't fiction. This is real. And it's happening right in front of our eyes. Joe Biden, in his final hours as President of the United States, scurried out of the White House like a common thief in the night, leaving behind a trail of last-minute pardons that would make even the most hardened criminals blush. Just hours before his presidency ended, Biden announced presidential pardons for a long list of those whose antics contributed to the Democrats' lawfare against President Trump. Also included in the bunch was Anthony Fauci, the former federal health official who declared during the COVID-19 China virus pandemic that he was the science. Fauci promptly expressed his appreciation for the pardon, but, of course, proclaimed his innocence. He said, "I truly appreciate the action President Biden has taken today on my behalf. Let me be perfectly clear." Always be wary of anyone who begins a sentence with, "Let me be perfectly clear." Let me be perfectly clear, I have committed no crime, and there are no possible grounds for any allegation or threat of criminal investigation or prosecution of me, he said. Fauci said he's grateful because the threats and possibility of a politically motivated prosecution, quote, creates immeasurable and intolerable distress on him and his family. But here's the kicker. While the technicalities were undoubtedly followed in these pardons, public perception will tell a different story. In fact, history has a lesson. An historic Supreme Court ruling established that accepting a pardon carries, quote, the imputation of guilt and acceptance of a confession of it. That fact alone speaks volumes. Picture it. Trump's team arriving at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue only to find the place looking like a crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance. Forensic teams dusting for fingerprints and evidence bags filled with shredded documents and deleted emails. The Biden crime family got out of Dodge, but not before granting blanket pardons to their most loyal accomplices, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and the infamous members of the sham January 6th committee, including Liz Cheney. This isn't just disgraceful, it's a blatant abuse of power, a get-out-of-jail-free card for those who spent years weaponizing government institutions against the American people. President Trump put it best when he called it disgraceful. And he's absolutely right. Many of these individuals are guilty of major crimes. Crimes that should have sent them straight to prison, not into the warm embrace of presidential clemency. So let's start with Dr. Fauci, the so-called nation's doctor, the man who flip-flopped on everything from masks to lockdowns, who lied under oath about funding dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan. The same Fauci who dismissed the lab leak theory as a conspiracy only to have it come back with a vengeance as the most plausible explanation for the pandemic. Fauci's hands are covered in the fingerprints of a global disaster, and yet Biden decided to shield him from accountability. A pardon for what exactly? For misleading Congress? For covering up his involvement in one of the greatest medical scandals of our time? And then there's General Mark Milley, a man who, by his own admission, colluded with China behind President Trump's back, calling them to reassure America's greatest geopolitical rival that he would warn them if the United States took any military action. Milley openly defied the chain of command and described Trump as a wannabe dictator, while ensuring that the real authoritarian in the White House, Joe Biden, could weaponize the military against his own citizens. Mark Milley should have been court-martialed, not pardoned. And of course, we can't forget the star players of the Jan 6 committee, a rogues gallery of power-hungry, Trump-hating zealots who turned a tragic protest into a pretext for political persecution. Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Benny Thompson, all pardoned, all complicit in a witch hunt that ignored exculpatory evidence, suppressed dissenting voices, destroyed evidence, and then tried to paint millions of patriotic Americans as insurrectionists. And why? because they dared to question the legitimacy of an election that was riddled with irregularities. But it doesn't stop there. Biden's last-minute pardon spree also included members of his own family, pretty much all of them, including his embattled son, Hunter, a man whose rap sheet includes influence peddling, tax evasion, lying on federal forms about his drug addiction. Let's not kid ourselves. Hunter Biden was the bag man for the Biden crime family, jet-setting around the globe, cashing in on his father's political connections. And now, thanks to dear old dad, he's free to continue his escapades without a care in the world. You have to ask yourself, if these people did nothing wrong, why did Biden feel the need to pardon them? Innocent people don't need pardons. This is the ultimate admission of guilt, a desperate act by a corrupt regime trying to protect itself from the consequences of its actions. And the American people deserve justice. And yet, Biden's swamp dwellers are being allowed to slither away untouched and unscathed. And the media, the so-called guardians of democracy, they'll try to spin this as Biden being a compassionate leader, offering protection to those who served his administration with honor and distinction. Honor and distinction. Are you kidding me? These are the same people who trampled U.S. citizens' freedoms, destroyed businesses with lockdowns, undermined a sitting president, turned federal agencies into political weapons. Their so-called service was to themselves, their careers, their wallets, not the American people. Don't think for a second Trump isn't aware of what's going on. He knows these pardons were calculated, a move to tie his hands, to frustrate efforts to bring accountability back to Washington. But I'll tell you something else. Pardons or not, the truth has a way of coming out. There are still investigations underway, and the American people aren't fooled by Biden's cheap tricks. The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but they turn nonetheless. And President Trump has made it clear his priority is to restore law and order, to drain the swamp, to clean up the mess left behind by Grampy Joe Biden. That means holding those responsible accountable, if only in the court of public opinion, whether they have a pardon or not. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, and we all know there is, then it must be pursued. Because the American people deserve to know exactly what went on behind closed doors in the Biden White House. And so as Trump moves into the White House, I hope they leave no stone unturned. Rip up the carpets, check the vents, scour every inch of that place for evidence of the corruption that festered under Joe Biden. The American people deserve a government that serves them, not the one that pardons its own crimes in broad daylight. And let's not forget the deeper lesson here. This is what happens when you put a career politician with a history of corruption into the highest office in the land. Joe Biden spent decades perfecting the art of influence peddling, and his presidency was the culmination of that corruption. From Ukraine to China to the DOJ, his fingerprints are everywhere. And now, with a wave of his hand, he thinks he can erase it all? I pray that Trump doesn't let him. I pray Trump holds the line. I pray Trump continues to demand accountability. And I think he'll get it. The Biden crime family can run. They can pardon. But they can't hide from the truth. Hey, this is Richard Syrett. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe.